Please join me in welcoming Ms. Klick, Mayor Paddie, and Mr. Rodriguez. Ma'am, thank you. May I put you right here? Mr. Mayor in the middle, please. J-Ron on the end. Okay.
Got it.
Thank you very much. Good morning to all of you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Appreciate you getting up early, traveling long distances to be with us. Thanks very much. So here you are entering a body that is pays the princely sum of $7,200 a year. You're entering a session in which, at best, the budget will be a challenge. At worst, it'll be a version of what we saw last time, with horrible cuts to be made in programs that everybody who you live among, your neighbors and friends, care about enormously. And the politics of the Capitol, at least in my opinion, are toxic at the moment. It's a very difficult time to be in that Capitol. The civility level is not the highest it's ever been. Why on earth would any of you want this job? Ms. Klick.
Well, I think that one of the issues that we're going to be dealing with a lot in the upcoming session is healthcare. I have some expertise in that.
Right.
And think that I can add to finding some great solutions for Texas.
So for you, healthcare was a big issue, will be a big issue, and you're going to bring your expertise to bear on that. Mayor Paddie, you seem to have a very happy life there in Marshall. What would possibly make you want to be here?
My wife has asked me that a few times.
I'm sure she has. Smart woman.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what was it?
But you know, $7,200 actually is quite a bit of an increase over the zero that I've been paid in the past.
About to say, radio stations don't exactly pay enormous amounts of money.
Well, I'm talking about my local service.
Even the mayor's salary
as well. But
in all seriousness, why do this?
Sure. Well, to be honest with you, and I'm sure a lot of folks say this, it's about service. And I think you know, my background and my history over the last at least 8-10 years. Really is a track record of service, whether it's serving with nonprofit organizations or serving locally on the city commission as mayor of Marshall. It's just something that I love to do, and it actually is also a part of my business. We run small community radio stations. We're like radio used to be. We run small stations in East Texas, and it's all about serving your community. The station you listen to on Friday nights for a high school football game that you get your community news from, that supports everything that's good in our community. So it's really just a feeling of service, and this is just another step in that.
Mr. Rodriguez, you've obviously served, as Mr. Paddie has, in public office before. You could go back to practicing law, probably make a whole lot more money, and spend more time with your family. Why are you doing this?
You know, I think it's a combination of what you know, Chris pointed out, the passion for public service, but I think too, you know, it's a very important time in Texas, and I think my passion and background really is in education, and you know, you can sit back and watch what's happened to our public education system, or you can choose to get involved. And for me, so much is at stake this election cycle for our public school kids. That was the impetus for me to run.
One difference, Mr. Rodriguez, between you and Ms. Klick and Mayor Paddie is that you will enter a Democratic minority that will probably be, most optimistically, 55 or so members. So the Republicans may not have a supermajority, but they can do anything they want without your support, and you can't do anything that you want.
Sure.
Because your numbers don't really permit that without getting Republicans to join you. Isn't this a tough time in particular to come into the legislature as a Democrat?
Absolutely. Probably one of the worst times in recent history. And that's going to be a challenge. I think there's no question that we've got to figure out a way to usher in, hopefully, a new style of leadership. And I know I've visited with Chris before. I just met Stephanie. But I think that my background in serving in nonpartisan seats, school board and city council, I think gives me, you know, I guess just a little bit of a foundation in working through issues based on policy, not politics, and ideas rather than ideology. I know it's, you know, a little bit idealistic to think that that can be carried over from day one in the House, but I'm very optimistic that we've got folks, particularly a new breed of folks that are coming in who want to work together.
In fact, half the incoming class, Ms. Klick, or half the 150, I should say, in January will be first or second term members. We know that it often takes until the second term to find the bathrooms in the Capitol. So the idea that we're going to have all these new people could, as Mr. Rodriguez says, be the ushering in of a new day at the Capitol in terms of bipartisanship. Is that what you want? You are a former chair of the Tarrant County Republican Party. You're a proud Republican. Do you want to work with the other side when you come in?
I think that there are issues that transcend political parties. And
what would those be?
Well, some of the issues are obviously there's bipartisan agreement on education issues. Not all, but some.
I want to push you on that, Ms. Klick. On what aspect of education is there bipartisan agreement? There seems to have been actually quite a bit of partisan disagreement in the last session over everything from funding to class sizes. We're going to probably have vouchers come up during this session. Where is there bipartisan agreement possibly?
I think the area where there's bipartisan agreement is that everybody wants kids in Texas to get a world-class education.
Right, but of course the devil's in the details.
Absolutely.
Mr. Paddie, do you think that Republicans and Democrats can come together during this session on the kinds of issues that Mr. Rodriguez, Ms. Klick are talking about?
Well, certainly that would be my hope. And as Justin mentioned too, I think those of us who have served locally have some really great experience there. I know there are people I served with locally on the city commission and my time as mayor that we couldn't disagree more on the majority of the issues, but yet we found ways to find solutions to problems. And if you're focused on solutions, then you can find that you can work together. And so I'm hopeful that will be the case. And I do think some of the issues that face our state are not Republican-Democrat issues. In a lot of cases, in my case, maybe they're rural versus urban issues as well, whether you're talking about transportation or education or you pick the subject. And so to me, if you'll focus on the solutions, and that's my hope, I certainly think that my record shows that I'm willing to work with anyone who's truly looking for solutions to problems, and I'm ready to do that.
Let me ask you about that question of party and partisanship, because one view of Texas today is that it's a two-party state, and the two parties are the Tea Party and the moderate Republicans. That the Democrats, Mr. Rodriguez, are the third party right now in a two-party state. So that the action in terms of agreement and disagreement will actually be on the Republican side of the line. Ms. Klick, you're quite conservative. Mr. Paddie, Mayor Paddie, there's no accident that I put you in the middle. The perception of you is to the left of Mrs. Klick and to the right of Mr. Rodriguez. Do you view the split in the Republican Party the way that many in the press and many in the Capitol community do, as a genuine split? Or do you think that the halves of the Republican Party, as we see them, can come together to agree on things?
I think they can. I've been in a number of meetings with good folks in our area, Tea Party groups, and we've had great discussion. And sometimes I think they come into it thinking that, in my case, that we were going to disagree on.
Well, you defeated one of their heroes.
But as we have a discussion, and I basically pose the question, okay, well, let's talk about what are those issues that you're concerned about that maybe you think I'm not going to be with you on, and quickly we find out that there's not a
much more common.
Yeah, it's much more common than maybe what they perceived him to be.
Did you run against Mr. Christian, Representative Christian, because you believed he was too conservative? What was in the end, what was the motivation for challenging him in that primary?
And I mentioned this during the campaign. I'll say it today. It was honestly never about him. This gets back to my original statement about serving my community. Obviously, there was tremendous change in my district. The town that I live in, the county I live in, is the population center of this district. This is not something I just decided to do in the last year as well. This goes back 10 years ago since I returned to East Texas. This is something that I ultimately wanted to do. And so this was the time, and that's why we ran. It had nothing to do with him specifically.
Let me ask you about some specific issues. Ms. Klick, you mentioned healthcare first. That is, again, your area of expertise, your academic background, your professional background. We know that we live in a state with 5.8 million uninsured people. 23% of our population is uninsured. We're the #1 state in the country as a percentage of our population uninsured. What do we do about that problem? What can the Texas legislature do about it? And what specifically do you want to do about it when you get in there?
One of the things that we're going to have to tackle is whether or not we expand access to Medicaid. And
you know, the governor is not for that. Are you for that?
I am very skeptical at this point. Right now, we're already having access issues for those that are on the program, and am concerned if we add an additional 2 million people to the program, that is just going to be compounded.
Won't the additional resources from the federal government provide some relief and possibly expand opportunities for the people who need insurance?
The access issues that I'm speaking about are providers that are no longer willing to participate in the program. And so people may have a card, but they don't have a physician or a provider willing to provide the care.
You'll find, Ms. Klick, that journalists in the Capitol will often say, okay, we know what you're against, but what are you for? So we know that you're opposed, let's say, to the expansion of federal Medicaid. What are you for? What's the affirmative solution then?
Well, I think that we need to reduce the amount of waste and fraud that is in the program. There have been a number of stories in the Metroplex about the dental program. We need to do some reforms to make sure that the tax dollars that are spent are actually providing care and not lining someone's pockets through fraud of the taxpayer.
Mr. Mayor, are there enough dollars to be recovered in waste, fraud, and abuse to cover the number of people I've mentioned are uninsured in this state?
I don't think so. Certainly, I think it's an issue and it's one to look at. But I think you have a system that's broken. So adding more people to it certainly doesn't fix that problem. One of the solutions I think a lot of us would like to see is that we'd like to see a program, it'd be a block granted program, something where we as Texas, just like anything else, our population is different than neighboring states. And so if we could have a program and the funding be structured in a way that we create a system that works for Texans, to me that's more of a solution.
Yeah, and you think that if the federal government would allow you to expand programs but don't expand it with mandates, just simply give us the dollars and then let us go off and solve the problem. That's it. Mr. Rodriguez, it sounds easy. Just give us the money. We'll figure it out.
Yeah, well, I think first of all on principle, I disagree with the governor on that decision not to expand the Medicaid program. Yeah. I think, we've got, I think numbers, you can argue any number of stats, but right, you've got at least 1.3 million Texans who would qualify under the federal poverty income level for the additional, insurance. For the
I think Steve Murdoch at Rice has said that 3 million people might be covered by federal health insurance.
Sure.
Or by the expansion of Medicaid or by aspects of federal health reform if we embrace them by 2014.
And I think what's happened, particularly in this, hyper-partisan environment, is you have, stereotypical characterizations of, folks on Medicaid being single women having babies, when the reality is 70 cents of every Medicaid dollar is used on seniors and the disabled. And so I think there's some practical ways we can implement some of the changes coming from the federal government that aren't going to cost a vast amount of dollars, that are going to really help people in need here in Texas. That's what I'm in favor of.
Mr. Mayor, we know that public education was a huge issue in the last session. It seems to be a huge issue every session, but especially in the last session where, depending upon how you calculate it, $4 billion or $5.4 billion was cut from public ed. Do you believe that the decision to cut public ed to that degree was a good one in the last session? When you go into this next session, are you looking to restore any of that funding to public education, and what should the state's position on funding of public ed be?
Well, that's an easy one.
Well,
softball there.
This is only the preseason, Mr. Mayor.
No, but you're absolutely right. Education is a huge issue, and particularly in rural East Texas, it may be the #1 issue that gets talked about these days, and that's something very near and dear to my heart as a father of 11 and 8-year-old that are in the public school system there, a system that is struggling in a lot of ways. My wife works for the district. My sister's a teacher. It's not just something we talk about on the campaign trail.
You know it personally.
Yeah, it's something we talk about around the dinner table. So it's something it's a major problem. And so as far as the cuts, no one wants to cut education. And I know none of the folks last time wanted to do that. There were tough decisions that had to be made. As far as restoring, I think it's overly optimistic to believe that even though the outlook looks better as far as revenue, that there's going to be this great restoration of this funding. My hope would be that at a minimum that we can look at least funding growth. And I think that's...
Which we didn't do last time.
Yes, and that maybe that's as optimistic as we can possibly be in the current climate. So, but, we'll see when we get there. Like I said, the revenue estimates continue to look better and better, and we'll see what we can do.
Whether the dollars are available.
But I also believe that when you start talking about education, it's not just about dollars. You've got a system, again, that's broken in a lot of ways, and so throwing more money at it doesn't necessarily fix that. And so I think it's time for us to take a real hard look at how we do public education in the state of Texas and start finding some solutions to some of the problems that are not necessarily money problems.
Well, let's get to that specifically. Lieutenant Governor Dewhurst last week made news by naming his committee chairs. One of those committee chairs was Senator Dan Patrick, who is an advocate for vouchers. He will now chair public education, succeeding Florence Shapiro, who's retiring. The Lieutenant Governor himself has said he's for vouchers. We know the governor is for vouchers. In fact, he could conceivably make it an emergency item for you all to consider in the first 60 days. There's some sense that on the House side, the outlook for vouchers is unclear. Would you be willing, as a rural member, to support vouchers? Vouchers are not always popular in rural school districts where there's some concern about the shifting of resources.
Yeah,
What do you think?
You're absolutely right. And I guess my first question would be, what do we mean? People throw out the term vouchers, but what do we mean?
Could mean a lot of different things.
Do we mean I'm handing you a check and go take care of it? Or are we talking about choice and that my child has an option of going to a neighboring school district? Right. In particular, it's a challenge in rural Texas, as you know. If you don't like Marshall Junior High School, well, your other choice is Marshall Junior High School. There is no other option there. Even the private school, and we have a good one there in town, it goes through 6th grade, and that's it. Yeah. And so it's a question of access.
Choice in one place is not choice in every place.
It's not choice at all. And so it's definitely a completely different animal, in my opinion, in rural Texas, and particularly in my district, than it is maybe in the Metroplex and Ms. Klick's area as well. And so I think those are some of the discussions we're going to have. But you are willing to entertain some version of choice if it comes before the House, depending upon what it is? I'm willing to listen to whatever. I'm not promising that I'm going to agree with it. Yeah. What I will make that decision based on is it good for my district, period. And I certainly am very skeptical about the idea of vouchers and whether or not that works, because I just don't think it works in its purest form. For my constituents.
Mr. Rodriguez, the environment in San Antonio is different. There is more natural choice. There are many more schools, public and private. Right. Where would you come down on vouchers and on the general issue of public ed going into this session?
I like to consider myself pretty open-minded.
And you've been a school board member. You know this issue from
I do, and I've been in the trenches with folks, and it's hard for me to imagine any voucher option that would not drain resources from our public schools. And to me, that is the chief concern. So I can't see myself supporting any program that would do that. But I think the larger picture is, when you talk about education funding, we have to somehow address our structural deficit in order to figure out how to adequately fund our schools. And that's going to take, it's not going to happen this session, but I think it's going to take some conversation and some movement in that direction to really, scrub our tax code, look at the margin tax again. I mean, we're going to have to really look hard and make some tough choices and some sacrifices in order to figure out how do we adequately fund not just the growth, but give our children resources at the local level to really excel. And I think we need to just not strive for excellence, but also the equity portion, which I know is going to be resolved in the courts probably later.
May not be by the end of this session. Probably we're kicking it ahead one more session. But
so those are, it's a balance there that we've got to figure out. Again, hopefully we can take steps in the right direction this initial session for us. But it's not an easy solution. That's the reality.
Ms. Klick, with regard to the school finance lawsuits now making their way through the courts, there are some people who believe that it would be presumptuous of the legislature to put some voucher plan in effect now without knowing what the mandate of the court is down the road, that maybe that issue, the question of vouchers or choice, should be kicked so that it could align with whatever decision on school finance comes from the courts. What do you think about that?
I think that I am for choice as a broad concept, but again, the devil's in the detail, and I will make my decisions on vouchers based on what's best for my district.
And are you, like Mr. Paddie, Mayor Paddie, waiting to see what the particulars of it are?
Absolutely.
But generally speaking, you're in favor of the idea of
I am for choice for for families in choosing where best to educate their children. But again, the devil's in the details, and we'll have to look at those proposals.
Have to see. Mr. Rodriguez, let me ask you about something in the area of higher ed. Your predecessor in the seat, or the current occupant of your seat, Mr. Castro, is a leader on higher ed in the House. The question of in-state tuition has popped back up. You may know that there are a number of members of the Senate currently, Senator Birdwell, Senator Eltife, who have said they would be willing to reconsider the decision of the Senate and the legislature in total past to have a policy on in-state tuition. They would be willing to go back and undo it. Several of the incoming senators, Hancock, Paxton, and Taylor, who were with me a few weeks ago, all said that they would vote to overturn in-state tuition. There seems to be a move in that direction. Again, from your perspective as a member, what you think will happen in the House, this is happening at a time when we're hurtling inexorably toward a Hispanic majority state.
Absolutely.
A lot of people are trying to go to school, complicated issue, controversial. It may be the spear on which ultimately Governor Perry impaled himself during the presidential campaign. was his support of in-state tuition at that debate in Florida. What do you think about that issue during
Well,
the
you know, I think you're right. I mean, we have a changing demographic in Texas, and I think, you know, my community, I think largely, if you were to ask any demographer, anybody that knows the San Antonio community will tell you that is, you know, San Antonio, that demographic is the future of the state of Texas and maybe the future of America. And you're right. I mean, we've got folks that, working families in my community who struggle, you know, to get through high school, but then also aspire to college and just simply can't make ends meet because of the rising tuition rates. And so I think that when we as leaders are talking about raising the bar, and I think we all want excellence for our communities, it's a little bit of double talk then when we then don't give the resources to achieve that level. And that happened as well with the Texas Grants program this last session, which was cut, which a lot of families relied on to make college tuition payments.
But you know, Mr. Rodriguez, the argument is that those children are the children of people who are undocumented and, you know, sorry. That's just the consequences of the situation you're in, and you know, your parents aren't legal. You're not going to be able to make be able to pay that rate. You don't have any sympathy for that argument that this is just it's simply a matter of policy and law. That's it.
You know, I really don't. I mean, I know there are young people in my community who, you know, one of them at Thomas Jefferson High School, which is where, you know, Joaquin Castro attended, that, you know, came with her parents. Her parents brought her over and is someone that knows no other America but the San Antonio, Texas community where she grew up. And I don't think she ought to be penalized and not allowed to pursue her dreams and have that opportunity because of that.
So if it comes up in the House next session to overturn in-state tuition, you would be a no vote?
Right.
Yeah. Ms. Klick?
That would be something that I would probably vote for.
You would vote to overturn. What would be your rationale for that?
The rationale would be that it's a fairness issue. We've got scarce or limited resources, and those that follow the rules should be at the top of the list to get the benefits.
But the young woman Mr. Rodriguez alluded to, and there are other instances of that, of course, you hear about all the time, she's not here as the child of illegal immigrants or undocumented persons through any fault of her own.
Right.
She was not the one who committed that particular act. So you still think, too bad.
You know, I think the problem with that is that, you know, folks that are here in that circumstance need to take the initiative to become a legal citizen and take those steps. And that requirement is really not there.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, what do you think about this?
I'm going to agree with a lot of what she just said there. First of all, if you're asking me how would I vote, I think that I feel like Ms. Klick does, that I would vote.
You would vote yes to overturn?
I would vote yes as well, and the reasoning behind that is, I mean, obviously, again, we get back to this idea that here's another system that's broken in our state and in our nation, frankly, that we need to address. But we also have to be really careful in a lot of these programs to not offer incentives for people, incentivize bad behavior. Not that these are not good folks, and I know some of these folks as well, and they're great people, great family people, you know, much better than a lot of other people I know. So it's not that at all. Again, it's about fixing the system, and I think this is just part of it. But as far as the vote goes, I feel that I would actually vote for it.
Let me ask each of you to identify an issue. You know, people talk about public ed and higher ed, talk about health care. A lot of people are talking about water coming off of the worst one-year drought in the history of the state, $53 billion state water plan, unfunded, and also it may not be the right plan. We just don't know whether this is what we need. But what else is on your radar screen, each of you, Mr. Rodriguez, then Mayor Paddie, then Ms. Klick, as an issue going in that maybe is a sleeper, maybe it's something we're not talking about that we ought to be talking about, or something that's a particular interest of yours that you would like to see the legislature address?
You know, I think you hit on water. That's, you know, I think, you know, water infrastructure needs all over the state is something that we've ignored, like you mentioned, for decades. But one that you didn't mention, I think, is transportation. I think transportation is a huge concern because, you know, as you know, we are relying on the same, you know, 20-cent per gallon gasoline tax for our highway infrastructure fund. That's, you know, some of which is being diverted, but you know, we haven't really invested in maintenance, much less new construction in the state of Texas for our highways and byways. And I'll say this, I mean, I think, you know, all those things come together, right? I mean, whether it's water, transportation, education, you know, our leaders talk a lot about Texas being a great state for business, and I would agree. But if we continue to ignore those things and we don't invest, it's not going to be for very long.
So are you advocating, Mr. Rodriguez, for a gasoline tax increase?
You know, I'm not saying that. I think we need to take a hard look at what we can do to bring in more revenue. And I'll say that. And I'll say this. I know there have been attempts to index it to inflation as an idea. That's been shot down. And you know, it's very hard to advocate for an increased gasoline tax when we're paying, you know, almost $4 a gallon. But I think that those are some of the hard choices we're going to have to make.
So if not a gasoline tax, where's the money going to come from?
You know, again, I think you're going to have to look at registration fees. You're going to have to, I mean, there's any number of things I think we'll have to look at. But again, we're in an environment, and I think the leadership in both chambers right now where, you know, that's going to be hard to come by. You know, no one...
well, in fact, the governor has said very specifically, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. He's not a big fan of almost any of the revenue generation measures that you've referred to.
Well, and I think that's just not reality. I mean, I think that we actually have, and over the years, become a pretty lean government. I think that we have cut quite a bit. And at some point, we have to, as leaders, show leadership. And we have to figure out how to come up with additional revenue to invest in things like education and our infrastructure and our water needs and our energy infrastructure. So those are things that, again, are they going to be solved in this first session? No. But unless we start having those difficult discussions, we're never going to get there, and we're going to continue to punt the ball.
Mr. Mayor, give me an issue that you think we ought to be thinking about in the next session that may not be on everybody's radar screen.
Well, actually, Justin took the two,
well,
there, and I would,
talk
if I
about
could,
that.
comment just a little bit. Of course, water, and being in East Texas, we're very fortunate that we have an abundant supply of that resource. So, you know, we play a little more defense in East Texas than maybe we would in another area of the state, and so that's going to be a big concern. Transportation, though, and I think one thing that we can agree on, Justin and many others, is that we have to do something. Take transportation, for example. I think it's dishonest for us, as we'll call ourselves politicians, to go around beating our chests and talk about how we're not raising your taxes and things like that, and I'm not for that. But at the same time, we're borrowing billions of dollars and creating a debt situation that is not good for our state. We talk a lot about that on a national level, and we all think that's a horrible thing, but I think we need to be real careful to take a good look at Texas as well.
So what's the alternative, Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, we have to have, I would rather, I'm not going to say that I'm advocate you know, the gas tax or vehicle registration, but what I will tell you is that we have to find a solution. We have to find a source of revenue to fund our transportation needs going forward. What the silver bullet is there, I don't believe there is one. It's probably a combination.
Are you taking new taxes like a gasoline tax off the table completely?
Not necessarily. Again, I'm open to having that discussion. I won't promise you.
You're open to having a look into the camera when you say that. You're open to having a tax discussion?
I'll have a discussion about most anything you want to have a discussion about. Now, I will not guarantee you that I'm going to agree with you.
I was afraid we were going to go 30 minutes without making news. Thank you very much.
So,
I appreciate it.
Yeah, but make sure you follow up by saying that doesn't mean I'm going to agree with you.
Yeah, but you'll entertain the conversation.
I'll listen to what the because again, we have to. It's time for us to have serious discussions about what the solutions are, and to think not in terms of, you know, I think too often we're thinking about, you know, the next primary or the next election. And we're talking about issues when you're talking about water and transportation. These are not 2-year issues. These are not 5-year issues. These are 10, 20, 30, 40, 50-year issues. Right. And we need to be thinking in those terms when we're thinking about solutions and not be overly concerned about what it means. You know, if I say this or if I take this position. I think people elected us to make those decisions, to be willing to take those tough votes, to take those tough positions that are good for our districts and for our state. And if that means that someone challenges us because of that, it means we get sent home, so be it. I personally am fine with that. I'm more concerned about finding solutions to our problems.
Ms. Klick, I want to ask you for an issue that is maybe a sleeper in the next session, but I can't let the moment pass. Are you taking a conversation about taxes completely off the table in your own mind in the next session?
I would say based on what I'm hearing from the people in my district, yes.
Yeah.
I hear.
Won't even entertain the idea.
Well, again, talking to the voters in my district, there are complaints about property taxes that have continued to go up, and they are tightening their belts, and they believe that local and state government ought to do likewise.
Yeah, okay, so what's your issue? What would be an issue that we've not talked about or that people are not talking about that should be on people's radar screens next session?
Transportation, again, is
So
an
we have
issue.
agreement among
Sure.
the three of you, yeah. How do you pay for it? Look, Deirdre DeLisi, the former chairwoman of the Transportation Commission, said on this stage 2 years ago, I think the problem has grown from then, that we have a $315 billion road funding hole to maintain current roads at the current level of congestion over the next 20 years. We need more roads, and this notion of the current level of congestion is made irrelevant by the population growth in the state. So we could be at a much higher level of need. Where's that money going to come from?
Well, there are a variety of different sources that it could come from, but I think that we do need to put in place priorities as to what types of projects are likely to get the funding first.
But I'd like you say there are a variety of sources. I'm going to push you a little bit on this, Ms. Klick. Give me one source of funding where the money might be able to come from.
Well, the proposal a few sessions ago where we would raise the gas tax, increase registration fees and so forth was not very popular in my region of the world.
Okay, so tell me what would be popular.
Well, I don't have a solution for you on that, but we're going to have to address it. You go to the Metroplex, there right now is more road construction going on in the DFW Metroplex than there is any place in the country. And we're a growing community, and we're going to need more capacity.
All right, I'm being told that we have to go to questions, but I'm going to take the prerogative of just have one last one, because I need to ask, of course, these three new members about speaker politics. You all know that there is a speaker's race on. There's always a speaker's race on. A lot of question about Mr. Rodriguez, what the Democrats, led officially or unofficially by your fellow San Antonian Trey Martinez Fisher, will do. Mr. Fisher says that he may instruct his fellow Democrats, whether they listen or not, to sit on the sidelines and wait and see what happens with the Speaker's committee assignments before he makes a decision, or what his promises to them might be. Mayor Paddie, Ms. Klick, you both know that there's some angst within the Republican Party about whether to support the Speaker again, or in turn to support Brian Hughes from Mineola, who was announced right now the only, may not ultimately be the only, but he's a candidate for Speaker. Would any of you like to sign a pledge card today? Tell us what you think verbally, a verbal signature, Ms. Klick?
Not signed any pledge cards.
Have you talked to the Speaker?
I have. When I was down in Austin earlier, have visited with the Speaker.
You planning on supporting him?
I have not made a decision yet as to who I'll support.
What's your consideration? What's the short-term consideration for you as far as that goes?
You know, what the agenda will be for the next session.
Yeah. Do you believe he's adequately conservative? That's often a thing you hear from some conservatives, that the Speaker didn't lead a conservative enough House last time. Do you think he's conservative enough?
I, again, am very interested in seeing what his vision for Texas is in the upcoming session.
Well, you saw what it was last session. Did you think that was conservative enough?
I think that there are those that believe that we made some progress during the last legislative session, but they would still like other reforms in progress.
Are you one of those?
I would probably be someone that has some concerns there, yes.
Okay. Mr. Mayor, how about you? You going to sign a pledge card for the Speaker?
Not signing any pledge cards for the Speaker or anyone else.
Yeah.
As far as making that decision, you know, that's, for those that have asked, it doesn't come up a whole lot in my district, frankly.
Comes up here.
Well, sure. Folks here care a whole lot about it. But back home, high 90% of the people couldn't tell you who the Speaker of the House was.
Right.
And so, you know, that's not something I spend a lot of time talking about out there. But as far as considerations, what's important to me, I mean, obviously, I'm a conservative guy. I obviously want a conservative person. Yep. But I also want to make sure that, you know, my decision will be based also on what I feel is best for my district. You know, I told people when I have answered the question in the past that, you know, I do, yes, sure, I want a conservative Speaker. And someone that will allow me to represent my district. And so that is critically important to me, is a Speaker that will allow me to represent my district, to vote my district, right, without any fear of getting hit over the head with a hammer.
Has Joe Strauss been a conservative Speaker?
I think, you know, if you look at some of the issues of last session, I think that we have to be pleased with some of the things that happened as conservatives. So in that respect, I think you know, you have to he's a part of that, just like everyone, all the other members who push through those things.
Yeah.
You know, like Stephanie, you know, I'll be very interested to see going forward, you know, what the vision is, and look forward to visiting with the speaker and whoever else may come forward. I know Brian Hughes, I know him personally, he's my representative. I look forward to hearing what he has to say, and anyone else who might want to put their name forth. But as far as making a decision, you know, I'm not prepared today, and wasn't a year ago during the campaign.
So neither of you has made your minds up yet?
No, you know, I'm not going to stand here today because I don't know who's there at the end. It's kind of like I asked someone the other day, you know, was Mitt Romney your first choice for president? And they were like, well, no. I said, well, are you going to write the person that was on the ballot in November, or are you going to vote for Mitt Romney? So, you know, whether or not we end up in a situation where there is no race.
Got to see who the candidates are.
Yeah, we've got to see who the candidates are, and we'll have discussions specifically about our district and what's best.
Mr. Rodriguez, there are those in the Capitol who say that Joe Strauss is as close to a Democratic speaker as you guys are going to ever get. Do you see in the speaker someone you can support?
You know, I'm going to eat my words a little bit, Evan, because I mentioned a minute ago that leaders ought not punt the ball. I'm going to punt this a little bit because unlike you know, my fellow panelists, I still have a race November 6th, so I'm concentrating on that right now.
Oh, presume. Come on.
Yes.
Presume.
But I'll say this. I mean, I do know Speaker Strauss. I think he's you know, a decent and honorable guy. We've have not had any conversations about you know, whether or not I would support him, nor have I had any conversations with you know, Trey Martinez Fisher or any of the folks in locally. You know, I think folks in Bexar County realize that there certainly is you know, a positive to have a speaker from our, you know, part of the state. But again, I'm focusing on November 6th, and we'll have that discussion probably at November 6th at 7:01 when I receive a phone call.
Well, this conversation was a massive buzzkill. All right, well, anyway, I want to thank you all for being such good sports, for being here. We'll now open it up for questions. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Klick, thanking Ms. Klick, Mr. Paddie, and Mr. Rodriguez. Thank you very much. Thank you all very much. Good sports.